Hello and welcome back to TR Street Mag, the show that teaches you practical ways to improve your photography, inspire your next shot, and helps you grow as a photographer. Today, I thought we'd do something a little bit different. I want it to be a bit more conversational this episode and kind of teach you my way of learning the exposure triangle. Of course, I want to educate people out there, but I don't want it to feel so theory based. I don't want it to feel so hard to understand. So we're going to speak about how to expose technically. And let's start with the three components that make up the exposure triangle: ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. So ISO for me is how noisy a photo can be, and it's really important to understand how to use ISO effectively, especially if you're a beginner starting out. ISO, I mean, if you want to learn manual, I'd really start with using aperture priority or shutter priority. But if you learn to set your ISO first, so you can have a range. So whatever your base ISO for your camera, like for example, my base ISO for my camera is 200. Some cameras it might be a little bit higher, and other cameras, I think most cameras would probably be 200 to 400. I know it's a little bit different for video. It may be a bit lower, it might be a bit higher. It really depends on what camera you have. But it's best to find out what your base ISO is, because that's the ISO that's going to work the best over multiple different scenarios. So whether it's light or it's dark, whether your photo's underexposed or overly bright, you're going to have the cleanest looking photos from that number. So that's kind of, like I say, the base is like your starting point. And then as you especially if you're using something like aperture priority, where you're only setting the aperture and the camera's doing the ISO and the shutter speed for you, and shutter speed priority, you're only setting the shutter speed. So ISO is really important to really get a grasp of. It's important in a creative way, because although people will say use the lowest number, don't feel put off pushing that number higher, especially when it gets dark. Don't be afraid to push that higher. And yeah, as I said at the start of the episode, ISO creates noise. So yes, you will see more like graininess, more like sandiness in your images, especially if you've got an older camera. I'm quite privileged to have an older camera and a brand new camera, and I really prefer using the older one because of that, because it adds that graininess to it. And, I kind of use that to my advantage to create that kind of film style look. So ISO is a really important one. Like I say, I don't want this episode to be technical in the terms that I'm teaching you theory. I'm teaching you what happens if you do push that number higher. Let's move on to aperture. So aperture again, similar to shutter speed, in kind of controlling the available light. So obviously, if you don't know anything about aperture, so aperture is basically, it doesn't have to be a circular, like say our lenses on our cameras are circular, but it doesn't have to be that. Many famous artists and designers, they shape light in different ways, and the world we know it is round, and the sun is round, and it makes sense to have something round like our lens, but then our sense is not round. So when people say that they create different apertures, they're not on about the number that they're using. They're on about how much light is coming through a particular shape. So when we close our aperture, we use a bigger number, and when we open our aperture, we use a smaller number. So obviously on one end you get in a nice creamy background, and on the other end you get everything in focus. But use your aperture creatively. Don't think about, oh, I need it to be on this number or that number. Like when you're taking a photo, I just want you to play around with your dial. You know which dial it is to change your aperture, right? Or maybe you've got a manual lens that has aperture, an aperture ring on it. Play around with it, see what it does. See how brighter and how darker the photo gets. The number doesn't matter. You just have to learn how to use it and how that, that button changes that kind of photo that makes it kind of more moody. And lastly, with shutter speed, same again. But this time it's a little bit different because we're changing time. We're changing whether something's out of focus looking because it's blurry, or because we've intentionally used a longer shutter speed. So maybe we want to do some shutter drags where shutter drag is basically a long exposure, except you start moving the camera. You might create a triangle with it, and the light that follows on the back of the screen or through the viewfinder creates different shapes. I would tend to not do the shutter drag stuff when I'm looking through the viewfinder because I have a lot less flexibility when I'm holding it up to my face. But use these things creatively. It's if you like having really sharp subjects, then make that number bigger. And if you like having kind of the blurriness, use the smallest number possible and go into the seconds. Be creative with it. Don't just be like, oh well, this video told me to do this. But yeah, so when we change each of these components, obviously, if I change my ISO, I'm going to need to change my aperture and my shutter speed to correctly expose. And then from that point, if I want to change my shutter speed a little bit or my aperture a little bit in order to, maybe slightly brighten the image or slightly darken the image, don't look at your camera and be like, well, it's 3 stops under. That's bad. Because if the final image looks really nice in your style, then the numbers don't matter. So I'm here to tell you the numbers don't matter, but do learn the basics. Learn what your base ISO is. Use the aperture in your lens to your advantage. It doesn't matter how expensive the lens is. It doesn't matter if it's a kit lens, but learn how to use it properly. So, like I say, we've spoken a little bit there about underexposing, overexposing, and correctly exposing, and like I also just mentioned, ignoring the rules. The rules are there to be broken. Always remember that. Rules are there to be broken. So you've kind of got the grasp that, okay, you need to play around with your camera. But what about when you take your SD card out of the camera and you've put it into Lightroom or Capture One or whatever you use? But we can do the same thing now. We use the histogram. So the histogram's that big weird looking graph in the top right corner of the screen, or somewhere on the screen there's a big graph looking thing. Strange looking thing, isn't it? Histogram. But it's basically showing you how bright the image is from the left side in the shadows to the right side in the highlights. So it's likely that if you intentionally underexposed, then there'll be quite big points on the left hand side. And if you did the same thing with overexposing, there'll be quite big points on the right side. And if you correctly expose, so on your camera where it says exposure, and it says 0.3 or minus 0.3 or 0, you're probably correctly exposed. But like I say, don't be like, oh well, I took a photo and it was correctly exposed, because that doesn't mean anything. If that's the look you wanted to achieve, if that's your intended goal, that's okay. But when you're creative with stuff, the numbers don't really matter. Doesn't matter how messed up it looks. My histogram sometimes it has all its color channels all over the place. But you can fix that. So yeah, like I say, don't feel overbothered if you did a whole stop overexposed or a whole stop underexposed, because you can always just change it, in post processing. So I really just wanted to talk about break the rules. Don't follow the rules all the time. But it is important to learn, okay, this does this. I increase my ISO number when, say on my newer camera, because the newer camera has, AI noise filters and stuff like this that kind of it kind of removes that grain. So I can bump my camera up really high numbers when I am using an f2.8 lens, because it's almost like you're not adding light, but you're increasing the sensitivity to light. So sometimes that, like I say, sometimes that graininess, it plays into your photo regardless, especially when you've got nice neon signs and stuff like this. Maybe you want it to look gritty and textury, and then you don't need to add grain. So that maybe you have a big f1.4 lens on your camera, where now you don't need to have ISO 8000, because you can use ISO 2000 or 1600 instead, so you can get cleaner images because you've got a faster aperture lens. You know, you're not nearly 2 stops, and, you know, if we're pushing all the way down to 1.2, then, you know, you might even be going nearly 3 stops down on your ISO. See, that's the difference at night. Like I say, in the daytime, you know, it's okay to go a little bit lower, and it's okay in certain scenarios to bump your ISO up a little bit, but, you know, don't go overly extreme. But it's, you know, it's the same with shutter speed. Like, for example, if you were creating silhouettes, you'd use a low ISO because you want, you know, less kind of sensitivity in the background. You want your subject to be kind of like almost black silhouette looking. I would use like the fastest shutter speed possible to kind of really make them stand out. It's been a while since I did silhouette photography, so I hope I'm explaining this properly. um, but you know, you kind of get the gist. So yeah, if you like these style episodes, I'm happy to do more of them like this. I want it to be more conversational and kind of, you know, something that you can listen to while you're doing photography. You listen to it and you're like, didn't think about that. Let's try that. So yeah. Um, and if you're enjoying these episodes and these podcasts, please do give me a follow. I absolutely appreciate it. And also give me a comment, get involved, let me know what do you struggle with? What do you struggle with, and, you know, what kinds of art do you like? And um as part of the street photography magazine, it's important to kind of hear from the community and hear, you know, what do you like, and what do you want to create? Because, you know, I feel like street photography is very point and shoot, but it can be creative, it can be abstract sometimes, if that's the way you edit and that's the way you like design your photos. So curate your photos, that's the right word. So yeah, let me know in the comments below what you think. If you enjoyed, please do drop a follow, and make sure to follow me on all my socials to stay up to date with the latest workshops and blogs from myself. I am hosting, this will be out on Sunday, so I am hosting my second photography workshop. It's online, it's sold out, yay. And yeah, so if you want to take part in, and you live in the UK, just follow me on Eventbrite. You'll probably see my adverts now and then, but every other month I host a workshop. So if you're interested and you want to learn more, some of them will be online and some of them will be in person. So yeah, feel free. They're all free to join. You know, photography should be free for everyone to learn. So yeah. So yeah, make sure you follow me on Instagram to keep an eye out. And yeah, and I'll follow you back. You know, just don't feel afraid to drop me a message, because I absolutely appreciate it. So yeah, anyway, thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.